When Pearl Harbor was bombed, I was a senior in high school, and I knew what rough road I would have to have before this thing's over with. Japan felt like if they got the biggest part of our Navy, that we never would recover from it. That's a dirty way to start something, and that's a sneaky way to start something. And somehow the dummies thought that someday they would be able to. How in the world they ever thought they could take this country, I don't know, but the volunteers were so great they were just lined up wanting to get in. A lot of these kids felt like it was their place to go. We were bummed. I want to get at them. The way it happened, the way we were bummed, the way we were attacked, you wouldn't have a choice. Your conscience would tell you that this is what has to be done. A lot of my friends, some of them went to the Marines because they figured the Marines are the toughest outfit you can get into. I was too young at that point to go in. As soon as I got out, I took a machine shop course. I went to school 8 hours a night for 3 months. From there I went to Glen L. Martin, Baltimore. And we built the B-26 bomber. We got to the point where every 4 hours we were rolling a B-26 bomber out the back door. Everything that could make something was busy to turn out war material because we was not prepared, and we liked a long ways being ready to be able to fight any battle. So we were turning out bombers where I had my brother Leach was at the Navy Yard. He was a welder turning out ships, so that's the way people went to work. The mother encouraged that. They didn't want us in that war if they could avoid it, you know. But she did wind up with 4 of us in, 1 in the Navy, 2 of us in the infantry, and the other one was turned down, so he joined the Merchant Marines. I was drafted in 1944, and I served my training at Camp Croft, South Carolina, and I trained to be an M1 rifleman. I learned to shoot machine guns, the BAR, and the mortar, and all that good stuff. When that was over, I went to Greensboro and got on a train, rode the train to Baltimore, to a bivouac section where they process you, give you shots and all that good stuff. Got us ready to go overseas, and then they carried us from there on up to New York and was put on a troop ship and sent to Scotland. I landed in Scotland, got on a train, drove down to Liverpool for Ular in England, was put on a transport ship, and I was headed for the coast of France. When we got close by, LST came up beside of us, and I went down the rope and got on the LST, and they drove this thing up on the bank and let the gate down in front, and we all run out and hit the beaches. The invasion had already been started, and I was going in as a replacement. And they put us on a freight train. There's 48 of us in this train, in each car. It was so crowded in there and so cold that once we stopped, I run out and got some brush, and I took my helmet and started me a fire in my helmet inside the train. Well, the MPs saw that smoke coming out, and they stopped the train, and so I thought I was going to get locked up for starting that fire and building that smoke, get that smoke going out. And we continued on up in Belgium, went out to another staging area, and I wound up in the Battle of the Hürtgen Forest, probably the most bloodiest battles over there. As a kid, we had hunting dogs. We had a cabin that had 200 acres of land leased. We'd go over on holidays and weekends, and we would hunt. This helped me in the Hürtgen Forest a lot. I had some mighty close calls. One night I was digging in, and my sergeant walked up and told me that this platoon was too crowded, move up on the point. And nobody wanted to point, but anyway, I obeyed him, and I went up was going up to the point, and an artillery shell came in and landed in the hole that I had almost finished digging. It was 3 men had gotten into it, and we had to sign paper who the 3 men were. You couldn't identify them, wasn't much left of them. Then, an old buddy of mine said, "Look, kid, next time you say a prayer, how about you saying one for me?" And I told him if he didn't learn to pray, he'd better soon start learning. As time went on, he and I was up in our foxhole together. I was up on the side of the hole pulling guard that night. He was taking a nap, and then he got up and made him some hot water. So I changed places with him, and he no more and got up on the side of the hole. An artillery shell landed just a few feet behind him. A piece of shrapnel went into this right temple, went all the way around through his helmet, between the helmet liner, and came out on this side, and it looked like it got hung somewhere. From there, it just went right on into his temple, and he just fell right over in on top of me. So I'd had him for 9 days, and it hurt when I lost that boy. But we talked about everything but what was going on, because that's one thing that helps you survive. You try to forget what was going on, and you kid each other. And he was the oldest guy. I think he was somewhere around 35. As we got deeper into the Hürtgen Forest, to where the supply lines had got so far behind us, you'd have to give about 6 people the duty of going back and picking up supplies and trying to get you some water and food for the next day. The sergeant named 6 men says, "How about you, and you go back and get us supplies?" But you didn't come back. They never did show up that night. We never did see them again. I have no idea what happened to them. The next night, he sent 6 more men back, and they didn't show up. So I'd already filled up my canteen with some of that muddy water with those bodies around, and I told the sergeant, I said, "Look, I'm hungry. I don't want to drink no more of this water. I think I know where they're dumping the food out, because I used to possum hunt all night with my dad back when I was a kid, and I knew how to check for moss on the north side of the trees. You'd watch a star, but it was cloudy. There wasn't no stars. But I knew the wind was coming out of the north, so I kept the wind right in my face. And we had run into a minefield several days earlier. We lost many of our men. The engineers came in with their equipment and identified the mines, and they run a rope through there for us to go by. So I knew if I found that rope and got my hand on that rope, that I could go right through that minefield without any problem, because they'd already cleared us a path to where we could go through. But I was lucky. I found the rope, and I made it to the supply line, and this volunteer that volunteered to go with me, he and I we couldn't carry enough back for the whole company, but we carried all we could carry, and got back to the where all the men were dug in about 2 o'clock that morning. And then after that, every night the sergeant say, "Kid, take so, and you guys go get supplies." So that became my job nightly. Fight all day, most of the time, stay up half of the night going way back and way back. And some of the guys began to get on to him that she was working the kid to death. So he finally told me, "You just lead them there and you lead them back, and don't you bring a thing." Your supply of rifle bullets was strung all over. I had hand grenades hanging in my coat. And I said I just threw my overcoat away, because every time I got up to try to run, I'd step on the tail of that thing, and it would just cut me a flip. So maybe that's one reason my body about froze, because I didn't have an overcoat. But I felt like if I was wearing one, I probably wouldn't been here today. It slowed you down a whole lot. So I just put 2 pair of pants on and some long underwear and a whole bunch of junk up here I could get on, and got me a big old field jacket and put that field jacket on. we'd always have to pick up some more ammunition and this kind of stuff. That's the reason it would take at least 6 men to try to bring enough stuff back to keep the outfit going. If you didn't watch, you'd be running out of shells. Hand grenades was very handy to have because if someone could crawl close enough, they could slug one of them over in a machine gun net. Every soldier up there, they wanted a hand grenade hanging on them. If they used one or two, they would be ready to get some more once the supplies went up. Then a little later, the machine gun, we were dug in, and the Germans, they attacked us, and machine gunner over on my right, off to my right, he got killed. And the sergeant didn't know it, but I crawled over. I knew he wasn't but a few feet from me. I crawled over and got on his gun, and I emptied all the ammunition I could find he had around there. I crawled back into my hole and pretend I'd never seen that machine gun. When he came around and said he had to have a machine gun, I kidded him and told him I did not know how to use one. So then some of the men walked up and said, "Look, Sarge, you do not want to put the kid on no machine gun because if we lose him, we won't have anyone to go get our supplies." So he says, "I guess you're right. So maybe we better take care of him as much as we can." So anyway, that's what kept me from going on machine gun that day. We got down to 38 men, and I thought we was holding for replacements. And one day, the sergeant came out and said, we're going out on a scouting mission, and I need 6 men, you, and you, and I would happen to be one of those yous. And what we were doing is we left our unit and went right straight out where we thought the enemy was supposed to be looking for them, which seemed like a kind of stupid to me to walk right into something. But we walked until we came in up on a river, and we still hadn't made no contact with them. So the sergeant decided we had to cross the river to see what was on the other side of it. So he says, "Okay, kid, you go first." So I got me a running start, and I hit the middle of that water, and I jumped, and I finally made it to the other bank, and I laid in behind a tree. And they just let me get across, and when the next guy started to cross, all the rest of them had walked up on the bank beside of him. And then they cut loose with machine gun fire, artillery. You never heard such a noise. And I got stuck on the other side of that creek for about 2 hours. And what men was left ran back down into the woods and stayed hid, waiting to see if I was going to make it back. So after about 2 hours, I decided it might be safe for me to turn and go back across. So I stood up a little bit and kind of pushed off from that bank, and I jumped as far as I could, and I hit that water, and then off to the other bank, and I no more and got up on the bank, and a mortar shell landed about 10 feet from me and lifted me up and put me way over in the woods. And next time I knew anything, the sergeant was shaking me. And he wanted to know if I was all right, and I said, "What happened?" He said, "An artillery or a mortar shell got you." He says, "Are you hit anywhere?" I says, "Not that I know of. But the cushion is what messed me up. The cushion is so great from those shells, it just does something to your head. And it messes up your memory, it messes up a lot. A lot of the times we would get down to very, very few men, sometimes down to 30, and we'd have 180, and we'd have to hold what ground we had gained. And then it would send up replacements. Then we would kick off and then fight another 3 or 4 days, and then we'd have to wait maybe again for a replacement. So this thing went on, and that's about the way the war went for us. It was a daily thing, and a few days, sometime a rest. About every 9 days, they would pull us back to a bivouac area and let us stand out there and heat some water in your helmet, drop all your clothes in that snow, and you'd take a bath out of your helmet. What bath that you could, but most time you would have mud all up in your hair would be full of mud. Your face, you could not tell whose color it was, and you were just full of mud, dried mud from crawling. from the melted snow or from the rain. It seemed like it rained or snowed or something almost daily. And they'd come up with this Jeep all loaded up with about a half a turkey or half a chicken, see? And man, would that be so good. Golly. But when they got there, they fed you. It would be quite a piece of chicken, leg and all, you know, or turkey. While you was eating that good meal, they'd say, get your gear back on. We're moving back up front as soon as we get through eating. And most of the time, the guys wouldn't even think about finishing their meals. It would make them sick on the stomach, and they'd just go out there and they'd dump it, and they'd wipe the mess kit out, and they'd go off somewhere to sit alone, because it was always a bad feeling. And I can remember once when that pain went through me, but a few moments right after the pain went through, something came through and said, you're going to be okay. And that's the way things went for me. You're going to be okay. So we moved back up front and we kicked off, and you make contact with the enemy, and it's the same thing over and over. The tree to tree, log to log, or anything you gain. And someday we may gain 200 yards, and the next day we may not gain any. If you could ever get them on the run by putting enough fire down, then if you ever could get them on the run, we had much better luck of getting them. If you could spot them running from tree to tree, that's when we had our best chances of killing part of them. But in the meantime, they were dug in and they had us in the open, and they had the advantage and we had the disadvantage. So day after day, that's about the routine. When you're on the ground or behind a tree and a German soldier saw you and he was shooting at you, when that bullet passed your ear, it would be a loud pow and it would make your eardrum hurt. That air from that bullet, I assume, and then you would hear ping, pow, ping, pow, and you try to pick out where the ping's coming from. That would be where the enemy would be, and most time he'd be laying down behind a log or stump, and you just couldn't see him. So if you ever had a chance to start shooting, and enough of you start shooting in the same direction, he would get scared and he would jump up and run, and that was one way that was able to get a few of them. It was just about looking straight at the enemy and the enemy looking straight at you. And all this period I carried an M1 rifle. And that M1 rifle kept my mouth so swollen. Because when I laid down, I wanted to make sure I was going to hit what you'd shoot at. Because once you shot your gun, most of the time it'd be sound like 40 men shooting at you. Because they could pick up where you shot from. And that old M1 rifle would pop me in the mouth every time because I'd be laying behind a tree or something. And I'd really lay down on that thing. And when it fired that shell, it'd come back and catch me in the mouth. And that old lip stayed really big, like I stayed to fight every day. But I was a pretty sight with all that mud and all up in my hair and everything. But that was just part of the game. And back in those days, you didn't gain any ground whatsoever until your infantry men had gone through it and cleared it. Now, a lot of times you could go and cut them off. You could put a wedge into them like this in behind them. They found out they were about to get cut off and captured. They would get out there in a hurry, and a lot of times that helped to save a lot of men, because by sending a wedge in this way, you didn't have to fight all the way through there. They would pull back and you kept getting closer and closer to home. Things got much, much tougher into Germany because you was getting on their home territory. And they had their Ziegfeld line set up. They thought it never would be broken because they had it to where tanks couldn't go through it, all these teeth in there like cement, and they had all these pillboxes with concrete like 6 feet thick. And through these little windows, they'd have these machine guns. The 4th Infantry Division had to tangle with that at the beginning of the Battle of the Hürtgen Forest. And one day we was in the battle, and my buddy and I were moving up from tree to tree, and first thing I know, the machine gun right in front of me with 4 Germans in the foxhole with logs laying, and they had that gun sticking out through those logs, and they opened up and it wasn't but a few feet from them. I fell in behind a tree, and dirt flew all up my face from one side and the other side, and my helmet would fly off because my hair would push it off, but up until then I thought that was the heaviest thing I've ever had. But I have to admit, I was so scared that the helmet would just lift my hair. I mean, the hair would just lift that helmet right off. But I'd reach up and I'd pull it back down. And we had some guys over on the right side could see the situation. They worked in a little deeper and worked their way in and got a side view of them, and they were able to pick them off until they got all 4 of them was killed. So that was another lucky day for me when I got through that one without a scratch. So some of those men sacrificed their lives by taking dynamite, putting it on a stick, and sliding it up to all that barbed wire and stuff that they had where we couldn't get through, and trying to blow that barbed wire apart. And we kept trying to get in to look like the same hole all the time, and some lieutenant says, "Hey, good golly, if they concentrate on this spot, why don't somebody move way down here? And let's blow a hole down there while they're not expecting it, you know." So he volunteered to do that. When he was crawling up to do this, he was wounded, but he kept going, and he set that dynamite off and blew himself up. He knew he couldn't make it back, but he made a hole through that wire where the troops could pile through it. So this is some of the sacrifices that went on up there. You can hear these tales all over the place. Other than that, it was just day in and day out, not knowing what's next. And you and your buddy hoping you make it one more day. When we got back from that scouting mission, they had sent the word out that we were moving back for a rest, because we had 38 men left and was going back to Luxembourg, and we all felt good over it, just anything to get us off of the front. So we marched a good ways backwards, and a truck came and picked us up on the 16th, and it carried us into Luxembourg, and I moved, found myself a barn, and I went up and got into this hay, and the cows down below me and the hay up above, and I got into this hay, and that's the first time I had been warm, and I don't know when. And I got so warm, my feet was frozen, and I did not know it. When I got warm, the blood tried to circulate in them, and they got real big and black like a balloon. I had to take my shoes off. That was a mistake because I couldn't get them back on. I reported to my lieutenant the next morning. He says I'd have to hang on if I could, as far as he knew. He didn't have no way to get me out from up there at the time. And so I went out in the snow, and I just buried my feet in the snow, and I got them down again, and I put my boots back on. So when I had gotten up on the 17th, they had parachuted like 5,000 German troops in behind us with American uniforms on, and it became very hectic trying to find out who was who. And we used who won the World Series much of the time when we get a conversation going, trick him into something, and then take him prisoner, whatever was necessary to do. And the third day, after the Battle of the Bulge, my feet, after being on them again, my feet got real big again, and then I was able to, they got on one of these first aid ambulances in there, and I was carried back. But after I was in the hospital 7 weeks, the doctor came by and he okayed me for duty again. I didn't look forward to that too much. I was dreading it. were out in the field in a long line, and when I got up to the desk, there's three people there with, they'd call their names out, and I had three of them lined up taking, so they could move the line on fast. And when they called me out, Loy, and I says, yeah. And they says, I see that you're a machinist. I says, man, I'm the world's best. He says, get over here, and we need you up in the 9th Air Force. They were getting banged up pretty bad, and then we need someone to go in the machine shop to help make parts for it. They had a personnel truck that came pick me up, and they flew me up in Belgium, and I wound up with the 9th Air Force. And they had the P-47s and the P-38s and the P-51s was located at this base that I had the privilege of working in this machine shop keeping parts for. One day a B-26 came in and was going to try to land at our fighter base. The fighter base airstrips are not very long, so wasn't sure he could make it, but he was running on one engine. He had dumped all his load, he dumped all his machine guns and everything overboard to make the plane as light as he possibly could. So he came in and he hit that runway on one engine, and I'm telling you, he was really moving. But he finally got it stopped before he got to the other end, and I got a chance to see one of the B-26s I had built parts for back in the States. And I got up in that fighter outfit. I had a bed every night to sleep in, and I'm going to tell you something, I didn't mind working those hours and pulling guard duty or anything else. It was June the 2nd or 3rd before any mail had caught up with me, and it caught up with me when I had gotten into the 9th Air Force. And I had a stack of mail so big, and that's when I found out that one of my brothers that was in training when I left the States had been over there. He'd already been wounded. He'd been back to England, and he was in the hospital at the same time I was, only 20 miles from me, and I didn't know he was there. So then as the next letter went along, I found out he was also sent home, and all of them was wondering what had happened. I guess that I never did tell them that I hadn't heard from any of them because I didn't want them to worry that I wasn't getting their mail. One thing I could do was write a short letter outlining everything was fine, hope to see you soon, and this kind of stuff. And I know my mother and dad, I know how much they were pulling for me. And as I was told, that they went to prayer meeting every Wednesday night, and they'd go up, get on their knees, and they would ask the church to pray for all four. Very fortunate all four of us came back. Most of this you can see as if it happened yesterday, and all that is so embedded it just won't leave it. So the only thing I can thank him that he let me come back. I don't know why, but I'm grateful that I was one of the ones that was able to come back, and so many of them up there. And the Hürtgen Forest that I was in was so dangerous because the troops that was going in there to try to retrieve the bodies, they'd step on a mine or something, and then they were losing too many men that, and they just, from what I read, they just left most of them in there, which I just can't get it out of my mind that this thing would happen, but according to that article it did. So I don't know. I know I was a little bit jittery most of the time, and but it's just something about these things that I hope we'll never have to repeat. After the war was over, after the war was calmed down a lot, I'd have to go every day and pick up some prisoners, German prisoners. I would bring them back to camp, and they'd clean out the hangar, they'd empty, work in the mess hall. Although I had a rifle on me, it didn't worry me. Those guys knew how lucky they were. I wasn't worried about one of them trying to jump me because they didn't want to go nowhere. That's the first time they'd had decent meals in a long time, and they were they wasn't interested in. But when you got to the garbage dump, can you imagine driving this Jeep with a trailer behind it and filled with barrels of garbage? I'm saying food scrap, because you know the American soldier. He'd get a big plate, he may eat half of it, he may eat all of it, and he'd go dump it in the garbage can, and then here goes his coffee can, you know, coffee right in with it. And you haul this out to the garbage dump, and you have maybe 4 of these German soldiers with you to pick them up and unload. You would have been shocked to see what was out there. Men, women, children, and everything. When you dumped that garbage, they would fight over it. I mean, literally fight over it. They'd grab it with their hands or anything to eat it. Because when you get hungry, you'd be surprised what you would do. And they would eat that garbage. Now, there wouldn't be nothing wrong with it other than all be mixed together, because it was dumped after each meal, you know, because there's a bunch of troops going through that mess hall. And when breakfast or lunch or whenever was over with, that garbage would be taken out to the garbage dump, and what it would be is leftover, whatever it was for, what it was, pancakes for breakfast or chicken or whatever you had for dinner, and you'd haul it out. The Air Force was real good to me. When I first joined them, they knew where I'd been. They came up and gave me a 3-day, I was only been there 2 weeks, I never had a pass. Gave me a 3-day pass, I went into Brussels. And Lord have mercy, a GI in Brussels. We won't go into that. You go back, and I don't know, had many weeks gone by, and they called me up and gave me a pass to the French Riviera. And that was down where, kind of like being in Florida, even in the winter, you know, on the Mediterranean Sea, it was warm, beautiful. I got some pictures that back in the 40s that you wouldn't believe. Over here, the girls would wear these long-legged bathing suits and all that. And I got over there on the French River, and all of them just had this bikini of the G-string. They were way ahead. It wasn't anything wrong with it, but that's what was on the water over there. And I got to spend 9 days there before, and they flew me down there in a plane. Came pick me up 9 days later and flew me back to the bay. So, I was really beginning to live it up a little bit. Because it was time to, and I was waiting to come back. So then they called me up and says, how would you like to go to Switzerland? I was going to learn to ski. I was going to do, man, I said, would I go up to one of those, they're going to send me to a ski resort. So I was all packed to go the next day, going to catch a bus, and they were going to take me to the train. I was going up in Switzerland and was going to get to spend a week up there. So the PX called my name out over about 11 or 12 o'clock at night and told me to report to the PX. So I went up there and I says, Loy present, sir. He says, how would you like to go back to the States? I says, I'm ready. He says, how long it take you to get packed? I said, I'm already packed. I was going to Switzerland, but I think I'd rather go back to the States. He said, well, you catch your bus at 12 o'clock, and they're going to take you out take a train to the coast of France. And I got on a ship in France, and one of these little Liberty ships, wasn't but 2,000 stuff of us on it. That thing just went like a cork. We got into one of the roughest storms, and everybody got sick, and the whole works down there turned out to be so bad. I just got where the only thing I could do to hold my. So I decided went to the mess hall, filled up my pockets with eggs or anything else. I went up on top deck and sneaked out to the back and got where the gun turret was. I wrapped my arms around the gun turret. And this ship would go up and the nose of it would go down, and sometimes it would go back right straight up. then it would back up a little bit. And one time I got waste water up to here. Nobody knew I was out there because they would have probably run me off because you got washed overboard because they were going straight into the storm. And they had to for 3 days because if they kept on the course, it would have probably rolled them because the waves was coming like mountains straight at you, and the ship had to go straight into them so it wouldn't roll over. So I was told, I don't know, that if this rail on this ship ever dipped into the water, it never would straighten back up. It would flip upside down for it. But most of those guys got so seasick, but it never did bother me. I landed at New York Christmas Eve. I didn't have time to tell Mother or none of them I was coming home. I had no idea. I was just waiting my turn. But the war had ended. The war in Japan was still going on. We were sweating out what was going to be shipped to Japan. And then when you get a notice to get your stuff ready, you're going back to the States, you know, you'd be looking forward to that. And so that was a notice. And I got home, it was Christmas Eve, and I called, I guess about 12 o'clock, I pulled into New York. And I got to a payphone, and I called Mother and Dad and told them where I was. It took them by surprise and very shocked them. See, next day was Christmas Day. I got home about 3 or 4 days after Christmas. There was times I thought I'd never see home again, but I was one more happy person. I know a lot of people criticize this country for dropping the atomic bomb. It's unreal what it would have cost to invade Japan, and how many troops it would have taken, and how many of them have been shot down on the beach. And just think, by dropping that bomb, how many American soldiers' lives were saved. They still didn't think that we could really go through it to a point that they would surrender. It's a shame we had to drop the second one and so forth. Then they could see there was no hope for them, and that's when they surrendered. The war had ended in Japan, and it was all over with, thank God. Just think, when you reached 18 or 19 and something like this to happen, 5 years later now, all this was settled, and you've been into the middle of it, and think about your age, you've lost 5 years of your teenage life and your young 21-year life that you could have enjoyed, but we didn't have that choice. We all chose to do what we did, and it had to be done. It was either that or they was going to conquer the world. If they soon get the world, and as much of it as they wanted, they could eventually control us by supplies, cut everything off from us. It would have been a different situation if we hadn't gotten into that war and we hadn't won that war. What good would you be with no freedom? Life to me wouldn't be worth anything if I wasn't free to do as I pleased. And I think that's one thing that we fought over, and it's worth fighting over, is our freedom. People don't realize and don't take time to think how grateful we are to be able to speak and say most anything we want to, and have our freedom. I'm proud I was part of it. I would not want to go back again. But if it comes to my freedom, I would go back again. We had a sense of duty because we were fighting for the world's freedom. And that's just about what the whole thing summed up to be.